Tim, you tweeted yesterday that this legislation was the worst piece you've seen in 18 and a bit years as an MP. Tell us why.
Because it's based on loads of bogus information. I think it's entirely legitimate to have a different point of view. The majority of things I've had to vote on in those 18 and a half years, including many when I was actually on the government side, are things I didn't agree with. But I think the legislation that is being pinged and ponged between the two Houses of Parliament at the moment is based on all sorts of assumptions that are false. The essential understanding that we are in a worse position than anywhere else, that people are heading straight for the United Kingdom, and yet the reality is 70% of people who flee their home country as refugees stay in the next door country. An ever decreasing fraction of people move further and further away. A small minority come to Europe. A very small minority come to the United Kingdom. And many of those, by the way, who come over the channel to the UK will do so and will not be refugees. It's a minority. The government's own figures show it's a minority of about 1 in 5. But we'll never know that if we don't process them. So having a policy, a piece of legislation that essentially says we're going to assume everybody is bogus, bracket when our own figures know that 80% aren't, and therefore break all sorts of international understandings in the process, is essentially tackling one small symptom of a colossal global problem and doing it badly on the basis of wrong information. So it's not just a decision I disagree with. Most of them are those. It's a decision I can't have any respect for because it's based on a total bogus misunderstanding. Or rather, I don't think the government are misunderstanding it at all. They know these facts and figures, and they choose to do what they're doing because they think it has some political benefit for them. So it's very hard to respect those behind it.
Tom, what's all your response to that? I mean, there are some claims. I mean, Tim made them yesterday in his speech in the Commons, was that perhaps there's been sort of over-egged to an extent by ministers. What's your reaction to all of that?
I'm glad to support the bill. Happy to support the bill. Very happy to vote against 18 laws amendments yesterday. I think it's needed. I think this is of great concern to my constituents. They want us to have control of our borders. I think there's a majority of people in this country who want us to have control of these borders, and I think to do that we need to have a deterrent. And I think the important point is, these are overwhelmingly seem to be single men who can afford to pay people smugglers who have come through multiple safe European countries before they've illegally entered our country. We've got to have a robust approach. I think this bill does that, and I'm happy to support it.
And Tim made a point in the speech yesterday, which was that, if every country starts doing this, in terms of closing down these legal routes, I mean, that could cause the whole collapse of the system. Is that not a real issue, particularly when Britain, according to some of the figures, is not taking as many as, say, Germany, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I'd also say, actually, talking about Germany, that actually its acceptance rate for refugees is actually quite a bit lower than it is in the UK when it comes to claims. So it's quite an interesting point. But I tell you where I've just been. I've just been with IOM talking about the Rohingya refugee situation. I've been to the Rohingya camp 3 times myself, and the people I was speaking to told me that some other countries, US, Canada, and I think now even Australia and New Zealand will be taking some refugees from the Rohingya refugee camp. So I can see what's happening globally. I'm very aware that we have a duty to be generous towards genuine refugees fleeing persecution, and I'm not for a moment saying that I don't want us to be generous, but we have to have a managed way of doing it. We've got to have we've got to have a system of doing it. And I think if we have control of it, and we have a system that has integrity at its heart, I think the British public will get behind it because they are compassionate. But what they don't want to see is tens of thousands of people jumping the queue and arriving here illegally, which is what has been happening.
I mean, Tim, you proposed having more safe and legal routes to do this. I mean, is that really the case? I mean, surely critics of that will just say we're rewarding criminal behaviour effectively.
Well, no, you bypass criminal behaviour. If, for example, when I did a visit with Conservative and Labour MPs to Calais last year, we met one of the Conservative MPs for Calais, for whom obviously it's a huge problem for him locally, but he was thinking about the situation beyond his community as well. In France, there's quite an appetite amongst sensible politicians of all different political flavours for allowing people to apply for asylum in the United Kingdom from a place in France, so you don't need to cross the channel to do so. And here's the thing, really. The fact is that a real deterrent would be if we had a system that worked. In the end, what this really is all about is the pictures of people crossing by boats, but also the awareness that there's 177,000 people at the last count in temporary accommodations, some of which are hotels around the country. That's because the government's not managing the situation. Now, I don't know the situation or the details of what happens to the many more refugees that there are in Germany than there are in the UK. And if there's a lower grant rate, maybe it's because they actually process their refugees, whereas we don't process ours. Those that we do process, by the way, turn out 80% to be actual refugees. And one of the problems is that jumping the queue, I hear the point, but the simple reality is any refugee who runs away is in a sense jumping the queue. They are seeking to kind of get a better life and to run away from war and persecution and all the rest of it. 99% government figures of Eritrean refugees, people who come to the United Kingdom by whatever means, normally by boats, turn out to be genuine refugees. If you know anything about Eritrea, that would not surprise you. However, there is not a single safe route. There is no resettlement program. There is nothing equivalent to Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, or Hong Kong, which, by the way, are the only places you can legally come from now as a result of this bill. So what are we saying to those people who are victims of Africa's Kim Jong-un, basically, similar kind of situation there? We're saying we will not help you. And so we've got to have a system which allows us to provide sanctuary for those who desperately need it and not play up nonsense that makes out that somehow Britain is awash. If you put Britain back into the EU for league table purposes, per capita, we're 22nd out of 28 in terms of the number of people we take as asylum seekers.
I think in many respects, I think to those who don't feel as though as a country we take in enough refugees, I think it would be very legitimate for them to say, look, we should take more, and we should have more safe and legal routes, and this is sort of what the cap would be roughly, because I'm assuming there'd be a cap. I can't imagine anyone would really believe it would be uncapped. But at the same time, realise that we can't have a situation where we have tens of thousands of people turning up illegally. But these are dangerous crossings that we must deter. But ultimately, when we talk about safe and legal routes, Labour, for example, talk about safe and legal routes. They talk about there needs to be a cap. They won't say what the cap should be, what level it should be. But my view is if you could apply for asylum in the UK from another country, I think quite quickly that cap would be reached. Quite quickly it would be reached. And then we could be back at square one with people who think they're refugees, but the cap's been reached for that year, say there's an annual cap, who will then continue to make dangerous crossings across the channel. There's a reality to the situation, which is we have potentially tens of millions of people across the world who could potentially claim to be refugee or get refugee status. We can't take all of them. We're a small island. Therefore, we do need to have a cap. And if we have a cap, if there is a cap, then we have to think about how we prioritise. And I just happen to think that, for example, some of the Rohingya refugees I've met 3 times, mainly women and children, perhaps slightly higher up that priority list than mainly single men who have come through multiple safe European countries. And actually, the Rohingya refugees that I met don't have the opportunity to shop between different safe European countries about where they want to go. And actually, seeking a better life is different from fleeing persecution.
Yeah, but isn't one of the issues of this legislation is that it's so black and white in terms of the exemptions that it puts down, that those kind of individual, scrutiny of those cases where, might have a heart, really sort of personal story about someone who's overcome, such adversity and faced terrible things that we can't even think of, they're going to sort of, all those kind of opt-outs are going to be taken out by this bill, and that's the real problem here.
But I think it's a really important thing, if you are in a desperate situation, if you're fleeing persecution, then apply for asylum in your first safe country. It's important to realise that all of these individuals have been in France, which is safe, where they could have claimed asylum. Before they got to France, presumably they went through many other safe European countries. Many of them are coming to the UK not necessarily because they want to be safe, because they're safe in France, but they're coming to the UK perhaps for other reasons, which is why I probably encourage them to look at our points-based immigration system and come here legally. It's not break our immigration.
Tim, what's your response to that then? I mean, surely, as Tom said, the argument put forward by Conservative MPs is that why aren't they just staying in the first safe country?
Oh, nearly 3/4 of them do. 70% do. But are we to say that, Lebanon, for example, has got to take absolutely everybody? 100% of people are going to stay next door? Come off it. So the reality is, first of all, most people do exactly that. Secondly, there is, under the United Nations Convention, you are not obliged to stop at the first safe place for perfectly good reasons. A, because it would mean some countries would bear an even more unfair burden than is currently the case. And secondly, people often have good reason to be somewhere else. So you might, when I meet people who are refugees who are heading towards the United Kingdom, it's because they're ex-British colonies very often and see us as the motherland. They see, or they have family relations here and other connections. But the thing is this. So first of all, most people do stay in the next door country. Secondly, they don't have to under UN law, and we should be grateful for that. And then thirdly, there is this trickling down, if you like, as people, predominantly, if you're coming from the Horn of Africa, find their way onto mainland Europe. It's a minority that do, and people stop along the way. So is France a safe country? Yes, it is. And the massive majority of people who go to France stay in France. And France could easily say, right, Britain said, we're not taking people from France. They can all clear off back to France. They'll come in the first place. We'll not even process them. We won't even look at whether they are or not refugees. And France could say, right, same to Italy, same to Spain. They're safe countries too. And then what have you got? Breakdown of the international system. So you've got one of two things. Well, actually, both of two things will happen. One is Britain becomes more of a pariah internationally and becomes less significant, less influential, seen as a bad team player. And secondly, at the same time, you'll have some people who will copy us. So you have a combination of Britain being further reduced in its standing and effectiveness and influence in the world. And secondly, you'll help to break down the existing pretty tenuous system that already exists. So I just think it's incredibly foolish and based upon all sorts of false premises. And by the way, there's no scheme to allow the Rohingyas to come here either. In the end, a competent government would assess those people who arrive here and would send back the ones that are not refugees. And you only know that if you assess them. By the way, people crossing on boats is a thing we really don't want. But one thing people have got to understand, this is what is so frustrating and shows such a lack of basic research into what's going on out there. If you fled from Sudan, for example, and you have worked your way through Libya, which is an appalling place, it's a reminder that no situation is ever so bad you can't make it worse. The Gaddafi's time in Libya almost seems like a dream compared to what it is like there now. It is a hellhole for people passing through it. So you have somehow got through Libya. You have crossed the Mediterranean on a flimsy boat. You've had whatever you've had through Europe as you've headed towards family or the mother country in the UK. I'm afraid a few miles on a boat over the channel, which seems terrifying to you and me, it's not a lot compared to the horror that they have been through already, which is why we should be looking at providing safe routes much further down the line, not even in France, further back.
I'm really interested by this. So I'm just imagining that me and Tim are put in a room for a day. We are the government, me and Tim, and we have to come up with a solution to this issue. I think that I am compassionate towards us wanting to help refugees. And Tim has said he wants to stop small boat crossings. Okay, we both want to stop small boat crossings. Tim says a way to do that is to have more safe and legal routes. But I want to understand more how this would work. So what I would mean in practice is you could claim for asylum, for refugee status in the UK from anywhere across the world, presumably. And I'd also want to know from Tim, roughly, what sort of cap would he be looking at? Would it be uncapped? Would it be capped? On an annual level, what do you think a generous refugee cap would look like?
Well, the government doesn't know. And there would be no cap from the government's perspective either, because in the end, what is being proposed is to effectively take anybody who arrives here irregularly, and because it's not illegal under international law, it's irregular, anybody who arrives here irregularly would eventually be taken to Rwanda. That's an uncapped number. So the government have an uncapped number of asylum seekers that the UK taxpayer will pay for through the Rwanda system.
Okay, so what I think...
And you won't get them all there, you know that.
What I think Tim is therefore saying is that anyone, if they believe that they're a refugee, should be able to and free to apply to get refugee status in the UK from wherever they are in the world. And there shouldn't be a cap. And potentially, if that means that we have over 1 million applications that are successful, but 1 million extra refugees we take that year as the UK, is there a point where you'd introduce a cap at all?
So there's no cap on your proposal. So the United Kingdom could very easily take 1 million people under the illegal immigration bill that the United Kingdom government and the United Kingdom taxpayer is responsible for to warehouse in the United Kingdom, because you'll have to do that because there's no way you're going to get the numbers of people you think you are to Rwanda, just logistically. But the place we start, so this glorious coalition of you and me in government dealing with this, Tom, the first thing we do is admit it's an awful lot harder and a lot more difficult and be an awful lot more grown up about it than the current government is being. There is not an easy answer. And it does involve much better policing of our shores, or more importantly, of the French shores, working with them to make sure these don't come across. Bear in mind, up until really the pandemic, a little bit beforehand, there wasn't a huge small boats crossing industry for 2 or 3 reasons. One is there wasn't such good policing of the Channel Tunnel, and people were coming that way. And then secondly, once that unsafe route was closed up, people found other unsafe routes to manage to come across. And so the reality is that we're dealing with a demand that is out there, and how do you do it in a manageable and mature way? And that's why being part of the international community and behaving like it is the way you police the numbers. But the idea that there's going to be 1 million people coming when we already take only a quarter of what Germany takes, only 7% of all of the EU's refugees, is a reminder that this is a problem, but it's not the kind of emergency the United Kingdom government is making out that it is. And so my accusation really is the government knows this, and rather than being mature about the problem and acknowledging that it's a difficult problem with tough solutions that involve more than one solution, is going for something simplistic that won't work and threatens Britain's status around the world and is also inhumane.
I need to bring this discussion to a close, but let me just give the last word to you, Tom. Where do you see this bill going? We're going in the final stages of ping pong. It looks like you might have another late night next Tuesday on it. I mean, frankly, do you think that with the amendments, etc., is it going to work?
I think we'll get royal assent for really
all the recess
before the summer recess, and I think that the essence, the ethos of the bill will be intact. But for this bill to be effective, clearly it will be working in tandem with the Rwanda scheme, and we'll hear about that before we close the year, we hope. I do think that potentially, in addition to Rwanda, we need to be thinking about some other kind of deterrent to go potentially in tandem with Rwanda or instead of. I think that's quite important. But really, what I think the majority of people in this country want when it comes to our immigration and asylum policy is net legal migration to be at slightly lower, more sustainable levels. And when it comes to our asylum policy, I do think there's a majority in this country in favour of compassion, but they want a controlled approach and a controlled system, which we do not have at the moment.